Some are expecting new Washington Commanders receiver Noah Brown to compete for the team's second spot on the depth chart. But regardless of his spot, it's actually his versatility that might make him the right fit at this position at this point in the offseason. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com, here with you every Monday through Friday. I appreciate you coming through today, everydayers. I appreciate you coming through every day to join this daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, on which we're going to go over the formation of the practice squad. We're going to talk about the trade of John Ridgeway, defensive tackle, to the New Orleans Saints. But we're going to start it all off with the continued development of the 53-man roster into what Dan Quinn refers to as the 70-man roster, as the Washington Commanders are signing wide receiver Noah Brown, who last played with the Houston Texans, but also has ties with the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, if you want to discuss any of that or anything else Washington Commanders related, all you got to do is reach out and send me a text message, and you can do that by going to joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. From there, not only can you send me text, but I'll send you text, update, inside information, bonus content, and we even have these insider Zoom sessions that we do from time to time as well. No apps, no downloads, no hashtags, just your phone, my phone, and we have a good time talking Washington Commanders. Again, join subtext.com/lockedoncommanders to do that today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Noah Brown, wide receiver, who I anticipate is going to be wearing number 85 because Cole Turner has moved to number 88 today on the practice squad. So seemed to open up the number that Noah Brown has been wearing with the Dallas Cowboys and the Houston Texans. So it makes sense that he's on the active roster. He would probably get those digits, and Cole Turner is going to have to wear different digits as part of the practice squad. But Noah Brown coming in, and obviously the ties are there, but then also the depth chart right behind Terry McLaurin. And a lot of people kind of agree that, this wide receiver group, as might have some potential. There's certainly some developmental opportunities there, specifically with guys like Luke McCaffrey, but ultimately kind of lacks the pizzazz and the punch and the sexiness that some other rosters do, especially when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith on top of it. The Dallas Cowboys have CeeDee Lamb. The New York Giants now have Malik Neighbors, and Terry McLaurin certainly has built a name of his own. But some are kind of wondering, is Terry McLaurin's name kind of losing a little bit of the scary Terry that it was once before? Now, I say that just looking at training camp and all that stuff this year, that Terry's going to have a little bit of a resurgent year, but the Washington Commanders are still kind of looking for that true blue number 2 guy. So Noah Brown comes in, and there's already some speculation by some people that Noah Brown might be that number 2 receiver. So I thought it'd be a good time to kind of take a look into what Noah Brown presents. And to me, more than just worrying about where Noah Brown's going to be on the depth chart, I think understanding who Noah Brown is as a player, his ability on the perimeter, his ability down the field, his ability in the slot, but also his ability as a blocker really kind of gives you that holistic picture of why the Washington Commanders went ahead and brought him in. So Noah Brown, 6'2", 225 pounds. That's what he's listed at. Turns 29 in January, so he's not the youngest guy in the league, but certainly not the oldest. Former 7th round pick of the Dallas Cowboys in 2017, coming out of Ohio State. And just because people are going to wonder, he was a teammate of Terry McLaurin's from 2014 to 2016 at Ohio State. Noah Brown missed the 2015 season due to an injury that he suffered, but was still there obviously for those time periods, or during that time period with Terry McLaurin. Spent 5 years with the Dallas Cowboys after he came out and was drafted by them. Played in 66 of a possible 82 games, had 25 starts. His best year in Dallas came in 2022. 43 catches, 555 yards, 3 touchdowns in 16 games with 13 starts. Actually had an insider who kind of remembered the time that he actually got a lot of those starts and said that he remembered looking at Noah Brown being like, man, this dude actually has some skill. At that point, a relative unknown, still a little bit of an unknown to a lot of people, but certainly flashed some ability there. Signed with the Houston Texans ahead of the 2023 season, so last offseason. played in 10 games for the Houston Texans in 2023, started 7 of them, finished the year with 33 catches, 567 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, he did miss 7 games in the regular season with groin and back injuries, and he left the first quarter of the team's wild card game against the Cleveland Browns with a shoulder injury. He was subsequently placed on IR after that game and obviously didn't play the next playoff game for the Houston Texans. Now, this offseason, he re-signed on a 1-year deal with Houston, but he ended up missing all of OTAs, and then he came back for training camp only to injure his shoulder again, forcing him to miss the last 3 weeks of training camp, leading ultimately to his release. Texans GM Nick Caserio essentially saying, look, we're just kind of focused on guys that can help us win today, and basically alluding to Noah Brown kind of battling these injuries and kind of having some injury history throughout his career, but also specifically with the Houston Texans missing those 7 games, getting hurt in the preseason or the postseason game, and then coming into this preseason offseason workout program, getting injured again. However, Nick Caserio also very complimentary of Noah Brown, saying, quote, he won us 2 football games literally by himself, the Cincinnati game and Tampa Bay game. He had 1,000 receiving yards in 2 games, whatever it was. Good football player. He's going to be on a team fairly soon and probably going to help a team win, end quote. And of course, with all the, the conversation of can the Washington Commanders be what the Houston Texans were last year, and the connection with Noah Brown and the Dallas Cowboys and Dan Quinn, and then of course the connection with the Houston Texans, why not go out there and get a player that's coming from Houston when you're trying to be what Houston was? But when we look back at those 2 specific games, right, Tampa Bay and Cincinnati last year, he had 6 catches. Noah Brown did 6 catches for 153 yards and a touchdown. Week 9 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 7 catches for 172 yards. The very next week, week 10, against the Cincinnati Bengals, both Houston Texans win. So no, he did not catch for 1,000 yards in those 2 games, but 153 plus 172, it's 225 yards. Doing quick math. It's very quick math in my head, so if I'm a little bit wrong, don't at me. But for Houston in 2023, looking at how he lined up, right? So obviously did some good things with Dallas in 2022, but really, when you look at the stat splits again, he actually had more yards receiving, career high in receiving yards last year, despite the fact that he missed those 7 regular season games. So really was kind of coming into his own with the Houston Texans. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at kind of how they used him. And for the most part, he did spend his time split, right? 61% of the time he was split. However, that also means 39% of the time he was not split wide. But 33% of the time he spent on the split wide side to the right side, split wide to the right side, 33% of the time, split wide to the left side, 28% of the time. Looking at his route distributions, ran more go routes than any other thing, but also ran hitch routes. The second most over routes came in third. So certainly some downfield stuff, but then also some short area intermediate type stuff. Interestingly enough, Noah Brown got 45 of his 55 targets in the slot. He's also known as a very solid blocker as a wide receiver, which is important, and he's kind of known for his toughness. So that ability to block, that ability to be tough, kind of his trademarks, right? 41% of his snaps against the Buccaneers and the Bengals combined came from the slot, so that kind of matches the rest of it. So, we have this conversation about labeling guys like number 2 receiver, number 3 receiver, all these things. And at the end of the day, it's really just about how they can impact winning football for their team. And then with Noah Brown, you can kind of see there's potential there on the outside. There's potential there in the slot. And in some ways, there's actually more potential, it would appear, in the slot. Now, we do have plans to do a film study. Not sure exactly when I'm going to be able to do that, but I do plan on doing that just to get to know him just a little bit better. But something, again, like he's going to come in and step in that second receiver role. I think it's a little bit premature to just kind of crown him there, but especially considering the time he's missed this preseason, he's going to need to get into football shape, get back on the field, catch up with Cliff Kingsbury and all these things. But he's certainly someone to watch on this team. Like, there is a reason they kind of went ahead. Again, we showed to practice Cole Turner's wearing 88. So obviously this thing was in the works already, because the assumption is that he'll wear number 85. So Noah Brown, new Washington Commanders receiver, some interesting stuff just right off the bat, but we'll go ahead and we'll continue to dive into him as we can moving through the week and all these things. But we're not going to be able to watch defensive tackle John Ridgeway, at least not until week 15 when the Washington Commanders visit the New Orleans Saints. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier than ever. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curated deals make it easier for you to find the best prices on the greatest seats. For example, my Game Time picks right now feature tickets to see the Chicago Cubs face the Washington Nationals for $7. If I wasn't working, I would take full advantage. I could see Childish Gambino in concert for $90, or you get tickets to see the Washington Commanders host the New York Giants for $110. And they have all-in pricing. All you got to do is toggle the all-in pricing feature on the app, and then you'll get the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Game Time even has ticket coverage, which covers your purchase with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and any tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. John Ridgeway, defensive tackle, was traded moments, and I mean moments, before we met with Washington Commanders general manager Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn. So the good news is we got some insight about the deal from Adam Peters, and of course the trade was being discussed for weeks ahead of time, or at least days ahead of time, but it went official right before they walked into the tent. Second time, actually, this last couple weeks they've done that. So very interesting. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get your daily insight into the best fantasy football draft strategies so you can win your season or win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this trade, the New Orleans Saints are going to get defensive tackle John Ridgeway. They're also going to get a 2025 seventh round draft pick. And again, right now it hasn't been specified. Is that the Commanders' seventh round pick? Is that one of the two picks that they got from the Eagles? And of course, one of those picks doesn't belong to them. But it's a seventh round pick. The Washington Commanders, in exchange for this, are going to get a 2025 sixth round pick. Now, I would say this about the draft value up front, the pick swap and all that stuff. I've had some texts from some insiders who believe that the team probably should have got just a six rounder straight up for John Ridgeway and all those things. But I think it's important to remember that, at this stage in the offseason, you're getting players. If you're the team trading for a player, you're getting a guy at the end of the offseason workout program. There's no more training camp. You're just getting ready for practices and all these things. And in-season practices are not nearly as intense as some of the training camp practices are. And you've also got a guy, depending on the scheme and everything else, you're going to have to kind of get him up to speed. Now, I've kind of made the argument that, the closer you are to the football on defense, the easier it is to transition from one scheme to another. Like, as a defensive tackle, other than like a 3-4, you're going to line up at, 1 tech, 3 tech, whatever, or you're going to line up here in a 4-man front, or you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. Like, a guy like John Ridgeway kind of has his tax shelter, I like to call it, right? Like, he's going to kind of be where he's going to be, and he's going to kind of do what he's going to do. Really, it's just he needs to understand how his role plays off of someone else's role. I don't want to make it sound simple, right? But it's going to be a little bit easier for John Ridgeway to kind of get up to speed. However, the fact that they haven't had him in camp, the fact they haven't had him for these preseason games, the meetings in the room, all this stuff, certainly it matters. The second part of this is you're trading away players that you don't plan on having on your active roster in the first place, right? John Ridgeway is a guy that basically the Washington Commanders said, we're not going to have him on our team. We're not going to have him on our practice squad. Not necessarily because they don't like him, but maybe because they just basically assume he's not going to be available. He's not going to clear waivers to come back to our practice squad. So we want to get something for him while we can. So again, there's not exactly a lot of leverage to say, hey, other GM, you're going to give me exactly what I want, because it's kind of a two-way street. You get something you need and want. I get something I need and want, which is draft capital. So that's why it kind of works this way. You're not going to see a lot of just like landmark trades unless it's like a Brandon Ayuk, who as of right now anyway has not been traded yet. However, Adam Peters on the trade said, quote, there was a lot of interest in John Ridgeway. You look at your team, who you have in the building, what teams are offering, and we thought it was a really good opportunity for him to go somewhere and play a little bit more than he would have played here in a scheme that probably fits him a little bit more, end quote. So basically speaks to exactly what we were just talking about. He's not going to get a lot of burn here. He's behind John Allen, Daron Payne, Johnny Newton when Johnny Newton is healthy, which, by the way, Johnny Newton not going on the PUP list like I thought he might, certainly not going on IR, which means he's certainly close. At least the team believes he's close to being able to come back and play. So if you're John Ridgeway, you're behind those three already, so you're automatically the fourth D tackle at best. And Phidarian Mathis, if this team believes they see some potential in him, they're going to go ahead and kind of do that thing. So now you're the fifth D tackle on this team, right? So it kind of just makes sense. Now for the New Orleans Saints, John Ridgeway has the opportunity to play a little bit more, specifically because starting Saints defensive tackle Kalen Saunders is now dealing with a calf injury that is expected to keep him out for a few weeks, is basically what the report is. So the Saints certainly need some help there. They need some depth. Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson says he has Ridgeway projected to be the team's third or fourth DT. So you go from being the Washington Commanders' fourth defensive tackle at best to going to being the Saints' third or fourth, which is the second or third, while Kalen Saunders is on the men. So obviously a better situation for John Ridgeway, and the Washington Commanders get some draft capital out of it. This also means that defensive tackle Phidarian Mathis' spot appears pretty solid at this point, which I know there were a couple of insiders who really wanted to see him stick around, even though I was projecting him to miss the cut for the 53. So they're going to be happy about that, and I'm going to be happy about that as well. I have no ill will towards Big Phil. He's a good dude. John Ridgeway, though, interestingly enough, fifth-round pick of the Dallas Cowboys in 2022, was also cut by the Dallas Cowboys. And I think, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Dan Quinn came into this 2 years later and said, hey, I cut you once, I'm going to cut you again. Because all the reports back then, when Ridgeway was cut from the Dallas Cowboys roster, was that their intention was to bring him back to the practice squad if he cleared waivers, but he didn't clear waivers. Obviously, Washington claimed him. He ended up in Washington. That's where he's been the last 2 years up until now, and now he's headed to New Orleans. But this is not necessarily the first time, not necessarily. It is not the first time that John Ridgeway has been cut by a Dan Quinn / Joe Witt Jr. team. Not cut, but moved from a Dan Quinn / Joe Witt Jr. team. Only this time they kind of learned their lesson. So we're not just going to waive him and let somebody else get him. We're going to trade him and get something for him. Of course, that trade, sending John Ridgeway to the New Orleans Saints, opened up the roster spot that Noah Brown will now fill, taking the team back up to full, which kind of brings up a question on whether or not the Washington Commanders are actually going to bring in kicker competition. I don't know. Maybe Cade York's perfect Sunday night against the New England Patriots in the new Washington Commanders Stadium, Northwest Stadium, is enough, or was enough. I don't know. We'll have to see what they go ahead and to decide to do there. But Noah Brown in, John Ridgeway out, draft capital in, and 14 is the count we're currently up to on the practice squad. Unveiling the practice squad, talking about some of the new names and faces that are on the Washington Commanders practice squad, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, and honestly, I kind of came into this whole thing thinking that the practice squad would probably be our lead topic for the day, but it turns out the practice squad is not the lead topic of the day. It's actually the final topic of the day, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 members. So I was right. My math was correct. We've got 14 members currently confirmed on the Washington Commanders practice squad, which means they're actually 3 members shy. So there's certainly new names and faces still set to come in to this team. Could have been one that dropped already while we're sitting here live on YouTube, for all I know. So certainly more names to come. We'll see what it is. Doesn't seem likely that the names that are going to be added to the practice squad from here are going to come from the previous roster, the guys who were waived, because it seems like those guys are pretty much all set. KJ Henry getting claimed by the Cincinnati Bengals was obviously one of the biggest surprise cuts of cut down day. He's been claimed by the Cincinnati Bengals. Tariq Castro-Fields, cornerback, who we kind of speculated might have the opportunity to make the active roster. He was also claimed on waivers. He's going to the Carolina Panthers. 2 teams, by the way, that will also face the Washington Commanders. Also, the New Orleans Saints, where John Ridgeway just went, going to face the Washington Commanders. And John Dotson will face the Washington Commanders twice this year with the Philadelphia Eagles. So, whole lot of revenge games coming up on the schedule this season for the Washington Commanders. And that's not even to count guys like James Smith-Williams, who are now with the Atlanta Falcons, who, I don't know, like it's not the same crew, obviously, but you could consider it a revenge game. But looking at the Washington Commanders practice squad, running back Kazmeir Allen is on the practice squad. And interestingly enough, at least interesting to me, I don't know, he's not wearing roster or jersey number 10 anymore. I don't know that Tress Way is going to stick with number 10. Maybe he's going to make a switch to something else. But either way, Kazmeir Allen not wearing number 10 anymore. Actually, I don't have my roster in front of me. I think he's wearing like number 36 or something. Kind of weird. A little bit of a weird number for a smaller guy, but also a running back that's a smaller guy. And officially, Kazmeir Allen is being listed as a running back by the Washington Commanders. So we can kind of fully make that transition there for Kaz. Cornerback Chicozy Anuzium, undrafted free agent out of Colorado State, was kind of a priority free agent this offseason after the NFL draft. He did some good things. Also was banged up a little bit during training camp. He makes the practice squad. Newcomer, so we're doing this in alphabetical order, by the way. Newcomer, defensive tackle Sheldon Day. So he's guy wasn't in camp with the Commanders, didn't participate in the preseason with Washington. 30 years old, so he's one of those veteran, which is something that actually Dan Quinn and Adam Peters talked about is, one of the few good things to come out of COVID is kind of the expanded practice squad rosters where you're actually able to put some veterans. There's a limited number and all those things. But Sheldon Day is 30 years old, was a 4th-round pick by the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2016, spent 2023 with the Minnesota Vikings. He played 6 games, started 1, had a fumble recovery and 8 tackles. So not a lot of production lately for Sheldon Day, but that's probably a reason why he's a 30-year-old practice squad player right now. However, certainly a guy to get to know. Guard Julian Good-Jones back on the practice squad. Quarterback Sam Hartman, who obviously was kind of a fan favorite, back on the roster as well. Defensive end Andre Jones, another one of those somewhat surprise cuts on cut down day by the Washington Commanders, back on the practice squad. Defensive tackle Haggai Nimbusi. Oh my goodness, I just brutalized that name. I've been working on it, promise you. He is the international pathway player for the Washington Commanders, defensive tackle, which gives them a 17th slot. So the practice squad rules 16 slots, 17th if you have an international pathway player. He is their international pathway player. Oh my goodness. Running back Chris Rodriguez Jr. is back on the practice squad. Really happy to see him back. Caught up with him a little bit after practice on Wednesday. Just kind of said, happy to see you here, buddy. Kind of see how he feels. He says he feels good, motivated to get better and continue to be part of the process. So that's good that his spirits are up. Guard Max Sharping, another new face to the roster, to the practice squad, 28 years old, was a 2nd-round pick by the Houston Texans in 2019. So there's another Houston Texan. He has been with the Cincinnati Bengals the past 2 seasons, playing in a possible, or 31 of a possible 34 games, did not start. So that tells you that most of those snaps, if not all those snaps, probably as a swing tackle. He's listed as a tackle on Pro Football Reference. However, the Commanders are listing him as a guard. Either way, a little bit of position flexibility there. Wide receivers Mitchell Tinsley and Brycen Tremayne both back on the practice squad. Tight end Cole Turner also back. And then defensive end Carlos Watkins, the currently newest or last new face on this year's practice squad. 31 years old, or turns 31 rather, in December. Was a 4th-round pick of the Houston Texans. So another Houston Texans connection in 2017, but he also spent 21 and 22 with the Dallas Cowboys. So there's your Dallas Cowboys, Dan Quinn, Joey Jr. Connection. Also spent 2023 with the Arizona Cardinals, started 18 games, and played in 27 with the Cowboys during those 2 years. He was there with Dan Quinn and Joey Jr. So there's that connection with Carlos Watkins. And then finally, running back Michael Wiley, who I know a lot of Commanders fans really enjoyed his preseason. He definitely put some really good tape out there. When they waived him, I was honestly not 100% certain he was going to clear waivers, but he did. And the Washington Commanders, I'm sure, are happy to bring him back to the practice squad. But interestingly enough, right, you got 3 running backs on this list: Kaz Allen, Chris Rodriguez Jr., Michael Wiley. You got 2 wide receivers, Mitchell Tinsley, Brycen Tremayne. You got the tight end, Cole Turner, a couple of offensive linemen, and Julian Good-Jones and Max Sharping. Defensive lineman, Andre Jones Jr., and Dubuisi. Oh, my goodness. Quarterback, Sam Hartman, and defensive back, Chigozie Anuzium. So a little bit of a spread. Again, Adam Peters and Dan Quinn were asked about kind of, is there a focus on keeping 3 running backs or doing this? And they says mostly about keeping guys they feel either could help them near term or long term win, and not so much about trying to keep as many players as possible in specific position groups. So a little bit of behind the curtains there on how to build a roster. Coming up tomorrow, we will talk to Assistant General Manager Lance Newmark at 12:45 p.m. Eastern Time before practice. We'll then attend practice. Then after practice, we've got Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels coming to the microphone. Training camp is over. Preseason is over. We're now in regular season mode, which means the media, we get to attend practice, but we only get to see the first 20 minutes or so. After that, they tell us to turn our eyes off, and we're not allowed to watch anymore. And that's where you're in. So no more charting Jaden Daniels practice throws, all those things, because I'm not going to be allowed to see the team drills anymore. But we'll give you what we can from practice. We'll also give you what we can from the press conferences. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider, and you'll get bonus content, exclusive access, and more. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to do that today, and make the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast your next listen of the day today. Get your daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, every dayers. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I will see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.